Colorado covers about 104,000 square miles. Most people who come here see the same short list: Denver, Aspen, Rocky Mountain National Park, the ski resorts, the postcard peaks. What they do not see is almost everything else. Scattered across those mountains and out on the eastern plains are the remains of more than 1,000 towns that failed. Some are hard to reach, some are locked behind gates and warning signs. One of them is not on the ground at all anymore. A silver camp built directly on top of the Continental Divide. A company town frozen on the edge of a cliff. The residents' cars still parked in the garages. A town at the bottom of a lake that only surfaces in a drought. And at number 1, a town the government shredded, buried, and erased. A place that still shows up on old maps where nothing is left to find. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for that one. This channel is about the forgotten corners of the map. If that's your kind of thing, subscribe. Today we're counting down 13 ghost towns in Colorado that Google Maps won't show you. Number 13. Tin Cup, the town that buried its own sheriffs. It sits in Taylor Park, a high valley in Gunnison County, just west of the Continental Divide, at 10,158 feet. The name is as literal as it sounds. Around 1859, a prospector panned gold out of the creek and carried it back to camp in a tin cup, and it stuck. The lode strike came in 1878, and the town went up almost overnight. By the 1880 census, 1,495 people lived there. With that much money moving through the saloons, a rough element took over local government and appointed marshals who understood the arrangement. The first of them was reportedly told that the first man he tried to arrest would be his last. The ones who actually enforced the law did not last. Marshal Harry Rivers was killed in a gunfight in 1882. Marshal Andy Jameson was shot dead in 1883. You can read the results in the cemetery, split across 4 separate knolls: Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, and a boot hill, set aside for the violent deaths, reached today over a small footbridge. One grave's long-lost wooden marker, there supposedly read, "Here lies Blackjack Cameron, he held 5 aces." Order only returned when the ore ran out and the roughs drifted off. The post office closed in 1918. Tin Cup never fully died, though. It's a small seasonal community now, with a store and a restaurant, and purists will tell you it doesn't even count as a ghost town. The graves settled that argument a long time ago. Number 12, Capital City. The man who built a governor's mansion for a state capital that never came. 9 miles up a dirt road west of Lake City, in a broad San Juan Valley at 9,480 feet, one man decided his little silver camp was going to become the capital of Colorado. His name was George S. Lee. The site started as Silver Glen, then Galena City. Lee took it over in 1877, and when the post office opened, he pushed a new name: Capital City. The mountain above it even resembles a Capitol dome. But the name was really about ambition. Lee intended to steal the seat of government from Denver, and he intended to be governor. So he built the part he could control, a 2-story brick mansion in a place where brick was almost unheard of, with the bricks hauled in from Pueblo at $1 apiece. It had a small ballroom and a theater with an orchestra pit. He did not call it the Lee House. He called it the Governor's Mansion, and he laid out a 200-acre town site meant for a city of thousands. He backed the dream with real industry: a smelter, a sawmill, a lime kiln, and a telephone line to Lake City by 1881. A few hundred people came. The capital stayed in Denver. When silver collapsed in 1893, the dream went with it, and by around 1930, the place was empty. Lee had sold out years earlier and died in 1905 with an estate worth $98.90. The mansion is gone. What's left is a restored log post office and one lone smelter stack in the Aspens. He built a capital for a state that never asked for one. Number 11, Gothic. The ghost town scientists never let die. Most abandoned mining towns just rot. Gothic got a second job. It sits in the West Elk Mountains, about 8 miles north of Crested Butte. under a peak of the same name that rises to 12,631 feet. A discovery of wire silver at the Sylvanite Lode in 1879 briefly ranked it among the richest deposits of its kind anywhere, and by the 1880s, roughly 1,000 people lived there among some 200 buildings. Ulysses S. Grant visited in 1880, then silver crashed in 1893, and the town emptied out like the rest. One man, Garwood Judd, stayed on as the sole resident for more than 15 years, keeping watch over the empty buildings. Here's what makes this one different. A biology professor named John C. Johnson had first come through the valley around 1911 and been struck by its richness. When his college stopped funding a field station, Johnson bought land in Gothic himself, and in 1928, he founded the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory in the ruins, converting the old 1880 hotel into the first lab. Nearly a century later, it is one of the most important high-altitude research stations on Earth. It runs a decades-long study of the yellow-bellied marmot and long-term work on wildflowers, and a 2020 conservation easement now protects it in perpetuity. The naturalist Billy Barr has wintered there, mostly alone, since 1973. Visitors call it the quietest place in the Rockies, and some of the scientists publicize their research by marching in the crested Butte 4th of July parade in skirts made of corn lily, playing trombones, kazoos, pots, and pans. The town died as a mining camp and came back as a question worth answering. Number 10. Independence, the town that skied away. Gold turned up here on the 4th of July, 1879, which is how the place got its name. It was the first mining site in the Roaring Fork Valley on Independence Pass, about 16 miles east of Aspen, close to 11,000 feet. For a while, it worked. By 1882, around 1,500 people lived there, across as many as 300 buildings, with sawmills, saloons, boarding houses, and a newspaper. The problem was the altitude. The gold was shallow, the winters were merciless, and the town spent long stretches cut off from everything below. As the ore thinned and Aspen boomed in the warmer valley, people drifted downhill. Then came the winter of 1899. A run of blizzards severed the supply line, and the town began to starve. By the accounts that survive, and some treat this one as half legend, the last residents did something remarkable. They tore apart their own cabins for the lumber, built skis from the wood, and left in a single group, skiing down the pass to Aspen. Nobody came back to live there. What remains is a scatter of log cabins, a stable, and a stamp mill, standing in a stark, treeless bowl against the high peaks. The Aspen Historical Society preserves them, and you can only see them in the warmer months because Independence Pass still closes every winter, the same season that emptied the town in the first place. They took their houses apart to escape their houses. Number 9. Teller City. 27 saloons the forest swallowed. Deep in the pine forest of North Park, southeast of Walden, there was once the largest town in the whole Grand Lake region. You would not know it now. Silver turned up near the headwaters of the Illinois River in 1879, and Teller City rose around it, named for the Colorado Senator Henry Teller. At its peak, it held roughly 1,500 people, with hundreds of log cabins, a sawmill, a newspaper, and a 40-room hotel called the Yates House. And it had 27 saloons for a town buried in the woods at 8,000 feet, believing it was building something permanent. The ambition outran the ore. The silver was low grade, and hauling it over the mountains cost more than it returned. When the price dropped in 1884, the town came apart fast. The population fell to about 300 by 1887. The post office had already closed in 1885. By 1902, the place was empty. People left so quickly that they walked away from standing buildings, and the forest simply moved in on the rest. Today, a 3/4-mile loop trail winds through what's left, cabin logs and stone foundations lying in the pines, reached by a rough dirt road out of Gould. There are no famous structures out there, no restored Main Street. Just the outlines of a city that a whole generation was sure would last. Quietly going back to forest. 27 saloons, and now the loudest thing out there is the wind. Number 8. Carson, the town on the spine of the continent. Carson was built in the worst possible place, on purpose. It sits high above Lake City in Hinsdale County, up a brutal four-wheel drive track through Wager Gulch, near 12,000 feet, directly on top of the Continental Divide. That is not a figure of speech. An 1892 newspaper described the camp as sitting right on the divide, with about half of it on each side of the apex. Rain that fell on one side of the street ran toward the Pacific. Rain on the other side ran toward the Atlantic, and in the winter, because there was no other way, the miners hauled their ore down the mountain on toboggans. Christopher Carson staked the first claims in 1881, and a mining district organized the next year with more than 150 of them. The St. Jacob mine alone produced over $1 million in ore, and the ground gave up silver, gold, lead, copper, and zinc. But the ridgeline that held the veins made the town nearly unlivable. There was no real road at all until a pack trail was cut in 1887, and no wagon road up from Lake City until 1890. The cold eventually won. By the early 1900s, the town was empty. A cluster of weathered cabins still stands on the lower site, their roofs now patched with sheet metal, on private land where the owners allow respectful visitors. Across the divide, only a few collapsing log structures mark the older camp. It's a town that never could decide which ocean it belonged to. Number 7. Summitville. The gold camp that poisoned a river. This one has 2 lives, and the second went badly wrong. Gold was found here around 1870 at 11,500 feet in the San Juans, about 25 miles south of Del Norte. By 1883, 9 stamp mills were running, and close to 1,000 people lived at the camp. Then, like the others on this list, it faded to a ghost town by the 1890s. It should have stayed that way. But in the mid-1980s, higher gold prices and a new method, spraying crushed ore with cyanide to dissolve out the gold, made the leftover low-grade rock worth digging again. A Canadian-backed operator tore open the mountain with an open pit and leached about 10 million tons of ore. The site failed almost immediately. Heavy snowmelt, a leaky leach pad, and nowhere to store the runoff sent acid drainage and cyanide into the Whiteman Fork and the Alamosa River below. By 1990, fish were dying 20 miles downstream. At its worst, the site was leaking roughly 3,000 gallons of contaminated water every minute. In December 1992, the company declared bankruptcy and walked away, leaving the state and the EPA holding the mess. Summitville went onto the national priority list in 1994. The cleanup has cost somewhere between $120 and $250 million, and it killed off about 17 miles of the Alamosa River. The headwaters now need water treatment essentially forever. They dug up a dead town to chase microscopic flecks of gold, and left behind a river that has to be nursed for the rest of time. If you're finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up and tell me in the comments which of these has surprised you most so far. The town on the divide or the mine that poisoned a river. From here on, the stories get heavier. The last handful are the ones people don't forget. Number 6. Woodstock. Built in the path of the White Death, the railroad put this town where it never should have been. Woodstock went up in 1881, a stop on the Denver, South Park, and Pacific line as it climbed toward the Alpine Tunnel west of Pitkin. It had a depot, a water tank, a telegraph office, a boarding house, and around 200 people. It also sat at the bottom of a notorious avalanche chute. For 3 years, that was fine. Then, on the morning of March 10th, 1884, the slope let go. The slide swept the depot and the houses roughly 1,000 feet down the mountain under tons of snow and debris. 18 people were buried, 13 died. 6 of them were the children of Marcella Doyle, who ran the boarding house for the railroad men. She survived, dug out after about 12 hours partly buried in the snow. Afterward, she sued the railroad for building a station in a spot where an avalanche was that predictable. The town was never rebuilt. Tellingly, when the railroad replaced the water tank, it moved the new one downgrade out of the slide path. An admission of exactly what they had learned. Today, only stone foundations, some rotting timbers, and a Forest Service sign mark the spot, inside what's now the Alpine Tunnel Historic District. A mother lost all 6 of her children in a matter of seconds, and the mountain has been silent ever since. Number 5. Iola. The town that rises from the lake. Iola is still there. You just can't usually see it because it lies at the bottom of the largest body of water in Colorado. It began as a ranching and fly fishing town in the Gunnison River Valley, a railroad stop since 1881, a post office by 1896, on a stretch of river so good it drew famous names to the lodges nearby. Guests at the sportsman's home reportedly included John Wayne and Herbert Hoover. Then, in 1956, Congress approved a dam. The Bureau of Reclamation wanted the Blue Mesa for water storage, flood control, and power, and Iola was in the way, along with its neighbors Sapinero and Cibola. Construction started in 1962. Over about 10 years, the government bought out and cleared the valley, roughly 200 to 300 people displaced, burning and dynamiting whatever couldn't be moved. Residents described it as looking like a war zone. By 1966, the water closed over the town, and a reservoir 20 miles long spread across the basin, holding more than 800,000 acre-feet. Its 3 arms are still named for the 3 towns they drowned. For 50 years, Iola stayed hidden. Then, in 2018, a drought dropped the reservoir to 39% of capacity, and the town came back into daylight. The old foundations reappeared. So did the concrete base of the school flagpole, still carved with students' initials and local cattle brands. From decades before, the town comes up for air about once a generation, just long enough to be remembered. Number 4. Deerfield. The Black promised a land that blew away. This story leaves the mountains. Out on the flat, wind-scoured plains east of Greeley, about 30 miles down what is now US 34, a man named Oliver Toussaint Jackson set out in 1910 to build something the West had almost never allowed. A town owned, farmed, and governed by Black families. Jackson had spent years working as a messenger for Colorado governors, and he had read Booker T. Washington on self-reliance. He filed a desert homestead claim in Weld County and began recruiting colonists. The name came from a settler, Dr. Westbrook, who called the land dear, precious. The early years were brutal. People lived in dugouts and burned cow chips for heat. But they learned to dry farm, and it worked. By 1915, they had built 44 cabins. In 1918, their first big harvest brought in over $50,000. On land nobody thought could grow anything, they raised corn, beans, sugar beets, and even watermelons and cantaloupes. At its peak, from about 1917 to 1921, around 300 people lived there. There were churches, a school, and a lunchroom that became the heart of the community. Then the rain stopped. The wet years gave way to drought, the Dust Bowl, and the Depression. And the same wind that once carried their crops carried the soil away. People left for the cities. By 1940, only about 12 remained. Jackson never let go. He tried to rebrand the town as a valley resort. He even offered to sell it to the federal government as an internment camp for Japanese Americans during the war. Both plans failed. He died in 1948. A gas station, a diner, and his home still stand along the highway, held up now by a museum and a preservation project. They built a promised land with their own hands, and the weather took it back one dry year at a time. Number 3. Gilman, the toxic town on the cliff you're not allowed to enter. You can drive right past this one, and thousands of people do, on Highway 24 between Minturn and Red Cliff. Usually without noticing the rows of pale, broken-windowed houses clinging to the edge of a 600-foot cliff above the Eagle River. That's Gilman. And unlike most of this list, it isn't a relic of the 1880s frontier. It died in the 1980s. It was founded in 1886 by a prospector named John Clinton and named for a mine superintendent, but it lived for a full century as a modern working company town. Electricity, running water, television, a clubhouse, a school. It was built around the Eagle Mine, which produced lead, zinc, and silver for more than 70 years. Zinc from Gilman went into equipment for the Second World War. The problem was in the ground itself. A century of mining pushed lead, zinc, cadmium, arsenic, and manganese into the soil and water. By the early 1980s, the Eagle River below was running orange with heavy metals. The operation was hemorrhaging money, and the power got cut. Workers went unpaid. In June 1985, the last 14 families were ordered out. In 1986, the EPA made it a Superfund site. 235 acres, 8 million tons of waste, some 70 miles of tunnels underneath. Here's the detail that stops people cold. The exit was so abrupt that cars and trucks still sit in the garages where their owners left them, and the mine's shaft elevators remain locked at the top level, ready for ore cars that never came. The town still stands up there, tagged with graffiti and slowly coming apart. It's private property and a Superfund site, so walking in is both a crime and genuinely dangerous. Flooded shafts, collapsing buildings, a $4 billion plan to turn the whole hillside into a private ski resort collapsed in 2009. So it just sits on its cliff, in plain view of the highway, close enough to photograph and impossible to touch. Number 2, Ludlow. What's here today is quiet. Dry, open scrubland at the mouth of a canyon north of Trinidad, a granite monument, a few interpretive panels, the Spanish peaks off in the distance. It does not look like the site of the deadliest labor conflict in American history. But it is. In September 1913, thousands of coal miners in southern Colorado went on strike against Colorado Fuel and Iron, a company part-owned by John D. Rockefeller Jr. They wanted better pay, safer conditions, and a life not entirely controlled by the company. Evicted from company housing, they built tent colonies. The largest, at Ludlow, held about 1,200 people. The standoff dragged through the winter, watched over by the Colorado National Guard. On April 20th, 1914, it broke. Guardsmen and company men opened fire on the colony, and then the tents went up in flames. Beneath one of the tents was a cellar the families had dug for shelter. As the fire spread above them, the women and children hiding in that pit could not get out. Accounts of the exact toll differ. Somewhere between 19 and 25 people died that day, and roughly a dozen of them were women and children in that single pit. The killing set off 10 days of open warfare across the coal fields, until President Wilson sent in federal troops on April 29th to stop it. And after all of it, the strike achieved almost nothing at the time. The men went back with their demands unmet. The United Mine Workers own the site now and keep the monument. The pit where the families died is still marked. In 2009, the tent colony site was named a National Historic Landmark. Some places are remembered for what people built there. This one is remembered for what was lost in it. Number 1, Uravan. Drive the Red Rock Byway along the San Miguel River in far western Colorado, and between two small towns, you'll come to a turnoff and a sign. There's a gravel road, a barbed wire fence, and a scattering of yellow signs warning about radiation. Beyond them is a wide graded valley floor, replanted with grass, silent except for the wind and the river. There are no buildings, no streets, no people. Nothing that looks like it was ever anything at all. But a town of more than 800 people lived right here. It had a school, a store, medical facilities, a swimming pool, tennis courts, tree-lined streets. Every piece of it is gone. Not abandoned, not collapsed. Removed. The town was called Uravan, and the name is a clue. It's a blend of two words, uranium and vanadium. The cliffs here held a strange yellow ore called carnotite, rich in radium, vanadium, and uranium. The U.S. Vanadium Corporation built the town in 1936 to work it. Then, the Second World War arrived, and uranium became the most important mineral on Earth. Uravan's uranium secretly fed the Manhattan Project, and because of wartime secrecy, the government would only admit publicly to buying the vanadium. Through the Cold War, the place boomed as a yellow cake town. The trouble was that the radioactivity had been built into the town itself. Mill tailings were used as fill under the buildings and the roads. Contaminated water ran through the pipes. Radon seeped up out of the ground. After the 3 Mile Island accident in 1979 turned the country against anything nuclear, Colorado sued the operators, and in 1986, the EPA declared Uravan a Superfund site and ordered the entire town destroyed. So they destroyed it. Over roughly 20 years, every house, every tree, every sidewalk and playground was torn up, shredded, and buried in a sealed cell on the hill above. Around 10 million cubic yards of radioactive waste went into the ground. The cleanup cost more than $120 million. The last 2 buildings were buried in 2007. Here's the part that stays with people. The town still appears on some old maps. But if you drive out to the coordinates, there is nothing there to find. And once a year, the people who grew up in Uravan come back to that empty valley for a reunion picnic. The centerpiece dessert is a yellow cake, frosted yellow, decorated with the black 3-bladed symbol for radiation. They lost their town. They kept their sense of humor. That's the strangest thing about Uravan. It isn't a ruin you can walk through. It's an absence, standing exactly where a town used to be. Colorado sells itself as ski lifts and mountain views, but the real history is out past the pavement, in the places that didn't make it. My own favorite is Gilman, a whole town frozen mid-sentence on a cliff, close enough to see and impossible to enter. Which one surprised you most, and which town do you think we missed? Subscribe, and we'll keep finding the places the maps leave off.